we're going to talk about your visit, basically. So tell me just kind of in a nutshell what you saw yesterday and today, and what you thought about AMC and what you saw.
Okay. Well, a couple of things. Yesterday I got to see the great Ops Center and capability that Army Materiel Command has established to manage its worldwide footprint in supporting the Army warfighter. Also looked at some of the tools that Army Materiel Command has put together coming out of the Logistics Information Warehouse to manage readiness for the Army worldwide. Those are both awesome capabilities. In fact, I told General Dunwoody that they really need to be shown to the Joint Staff and to the Marine Corps, who has similar requirements that I think that they could learn from. Just that tool in managing readiness really is going to become important as we draw down, because we want to make sure that we do not end up in a hollow force, and being able to do those kind of cross-leveling and real-time assessments of where you are is just critical. Went over to Aviation and Missile Command with General Rogers, and also with Colonel Chris Carlisle, the Corpus Christi commander. They walked me through some of the tools that they were using out of LMP and how they're really taking advantage of LMP. So for the pain of fielding the system, we are now truly reaping the gain, both in decreased cost of inventory and effectiveness in managing the aviation depot. So frankly, I'm looking forward to getting down to Corpus Christi to visit that depot when I get the opportunity. Today I was down at Anniston, visited Anniston Army Depot, and just looking at the lines that they have in place for major tracked vehicles, the engine line, the transmission line, great work that they've done in leaning out their processes and becoming just incredibly more productive. Same thing with the small weapons facility. Again, brand new facility that they just opened up, built with Lean Six Sigma in mind so that it really flows and they're able to increase production at lower cost. Just an incredible capability that the Army has put in place there. All of which is going to be incredibly important as we have now entered an era of fiscal austerity.
We talked a little bit about, as we enter the fiscally lean times, how do you think that's going to bode for logistics in the Department of Defense? What sort of changes do you see coming from that?
Well, logistics is a $180 billion activity in the Department of Defense. We've given probably $10, $15 billion back over the last budget period, over the period of the budget, so not per year. But we really have to keep the pressure on. Every dollar that we can affect in logistics without affecting logistics capability, so provide the same capability at a lower cost, those are dollars that the U.S. military, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps can use either for force structure or for modernization of equipment. And that is going to be critical. Even as we turn from the two wars that we've been in and are still engaged in one of them today, but that one too shall draw down over the next couple of years, it's important that we sustain the posture that we have, that we can do the things that the world relies on our military, and certainly the American people rely on our military to be able to do. So getting logistics down to a cost-effective operation is going to become even more important. And frankly, many of the things that I saw today are the backbone of doing that.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit, we're going to skip backwards a little bit, I think within the last year. Obviously you traveled over to Kuwait to look at the drawdown coming out of equipment coming out of Iraq. Can you talk a little bit about the successes that we had there, and in particular the AMC successes that you saw there?
Certainly. And a lot of that was an AMC success, but it's really an Army as a whole and really defense posture as a whole. First, let me point out that it was not the first time I've been over there. I've been to Iraq a couple of times, been to Afghanistan numerous times. So looking at what we did and knowing what we had in Iraq, going back to 2009 when I really started focusing on drawdown in Iraq, and then the drawdown between 10 and December of 11 when we left. And really that drawdown took place between September of 11 and December of 11. Just an absolutely phenomenal logistics capability. Most people do not understand the complexity of that operation. Just cataloging all that stuff, getting it out of theater, deciding what we needed, what we didn't need, sorting through that. 4 second was critical in that process. So Colonel John Lascotti, just critical piece of that, working with 1st Theater Sustainment Command as well, and obviously AMC Forward. Sorting through that, bringing that stuff home, marshaling it, cleaning it, getting it on vessels so it could come back here to reset. In October, we still thought we were going to have a residual force in Iraq. So there was stuff still there for that residual force. And really, just to be able to turn that capability out and get it out. Remember, while we were still sustaining the force in Afghanistan and turning some of those pieces of equipment to Afghanistan is just a logistics miracle, if you really want to know. Resetting some of that stuff in Kuwait so that it could go into APS stock there. There is other missions in that theater. Iran is there. We need to be prepared for any kind of scenario. And just a phenomenal piece of work.
Okay. Excuse me.
I will also point out I presented that Major General Ken Dowd, the 1st TSC commander, gave me a photograph of the last MRAP that crossed the berm coming out of Iraq, which I presented to Dr. Ash Carter, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, who's traveled over there a number of times and looked at the log laydown.
We just went a few weeks ago, Joseph, and one of our bosses went and we have photographs of the last MRAP as it comes off as it comes off of Beaumont. So it's kind of a full circle and interesting story.
That was posted on Defense Link.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, let's talk a little bit about, in a lot of instances, an exercise like that or an operation like that would be kind of practice for what's coming up. But Afghanistan has some, it's very dissimilar. What do you see as some of the challenges we're going to face as we draw down in Afghanistan?
Yeah. As I just said, Iraq, just a logistics miracle on what we did and getting everything out and sorting through. If I back up, in 2010, when I was in Iraq, as we transitioned from Operation Iraqi Freedom to Operation New Dawn, Brigadier General Gus Perna was the C4 for NMFI as they transitioned to USFI. Now the Joint Munitions Command commander and soon coming down to AMC headquarters. And Gus told me at that time that the operation the drawdown that he led for OIF from a logistics standpoint was really just a dry run for the drawdown that would have to take place during Operation New Dawn. And you could almost say the same thing about drawing down out of Iraq is really a dry run for the complexity of the drawdown that we're going to have to go through in Afghanistan. Just for analogy standpoint, when people talk about these drawdowns, and I'll talk about the complexity of Afghanistan in a moment, if you look at Operation Desert Storm back at the beginning of the 90s, Operation Desert Storm was like checking into a hotel. You got all this stuff there over a period of time. You did the operation, you turned around, you packed up, you brought it all home. It took a year to pack all that stuff up and bring it home, but it was still in, out. Some of the stuff never left its suitcase, if you would. These operations are like moving into a house. So you've been there for 10 years. Things have collected. Things are in the attic. In June 2009, I went to Iraq with Dr. Carter, who was then the Undersecretary of Acquisition Technology and Logistics, and Major General Kurt Stein, who was the 4 at the time, said, there's 2.8 million items here that we have to get out of Iraq, just Iraq. 3 months later, I was in Dr. Carter's office saying there's 3.4 million items we have to get out of Iraq. And he said, shouldn't it be going down? And I explained to him that, in point of fact, we were getting things back on record, which is a good thing. So now we know what we have to take out. All right, fast forward to Afghanistan. So we think there's about 50,000 vehicles in Afghanistan, about 100,000 container loads of material, and there's probably going to be more of each as we start going through this, just on the nature of the rotation of the forces and what's come in and what's come out. So we've set some pretty high goals for getting out. Afghanistan, if anyone has ever looked at a map, is a landlocked country. Very few routes into that country. The major route that we've been using into that country has been closed for the last 6 months. We're hopeful that it'll open at some point soon, but it remains closed at this point. The northern routes, which have become so critical to sustaining our forces there, while they do allow two-way transit, we are just beginning to exercise that. And even when I think we get that operating at full capacity, it's never going to reach the capacities that we had, that we will have through Pakistan, and certainly not to the nature where we had in Iraq. Iraq, first of all, it had Kuwait, bordering country, had Jordan, bordering country, two countries that are our allies that allow us to transit their territory in an open manner. We had forces in Kuwait, first TSC and its subordinate units that were able to go into Iraq and help pull stuff out of Iraq. So part of that express capability that we had. Kuwait also, Arif with the capability to do wash racks and reset and great port facilities. None of that, even with Pakistan open, exists coming out of Afghanistan. So as we figure out what we have, it's going to be more difficult, more expensive. We're flying stuff to intermodal places for some allied nations, and then we'll sail material home. But it's going to be a much more complex, much longer, harder operation to execute. The logistics community as a whole, Army Material Command being a key component of that, and Army forces underneath that, certainly the 401st for the Afghan operation, are just going to become critical in doing that. And the lessons learned that we have are just going to be an important part of doing that. But we have really set the bar incredibly high. People have great expectations for what we were able to do, both surging the force in Iraq, then starting to draw down in Iraq while we surged the force simultaneously in Afghanistan. In January 2010, after the president ordered the additional 30,000 forces into Afghanistan, many people forget that was on the heels of a 20,000 person surge. United States Transportation Command, which of course does most of the movement, told us that there's really no white space in the flow to get more material in. In that no white space, we put in 7,500 MATVs that didn't exist until about January 2010, plus additional variety of MRAPs. We moved about 10,000 MRAPs that were not in that flow pattern into Afghanistan at the same time we were surging the force. So the bar is very high for the logistics community. We've exceeded expectations of many people before. I'm hopeful we're able to do it again in Afghanistan, and we'll just have to work double time and see what's possible.
Can you think about anything else, though? Anything else you would like AMC in particular, the Army logisticians in general, to know about your visit or about the job they do?
Well, again, let me just step back. I visited one depot and talked to the commander of another depot. As we bring the forces back, resetting those forces is critical to our capability. That requirement is not going to go away in the peacetime or whatever peacetime may look like in the new normal of post 9/11 world that we operate in. At the same time, as I said earlier in this interview, we're entering a time of true fiscal austerity. Department of Defense budget is going to go down by $487 billion over 10 years, 259 taken out in the 13 president's budget that's proposed. And it's just going to be critical that we look for those opportunities for savings, both within the Army and across the joint community, so we can turn those dollars back. We have a great track record of doing that, but we cannot let up in driving those capabilities. But I really believe that we're up for up to that challenge. And in our discussions yesterday, we discussed challenges are opportunities, and I believe we're well set to do that.
Can you talk a little bit about the need to continue to support the industrial base?
Now, as we draw down and as we're spending less dollars in the industrial base, it's absolutely critical that we assess what our impacts are on the industrial base. And so when you look at the industrial base, you really have to look at it holistically. You have to look at it, commercial industrial base and the organic industrial base. And you have to figure out how to utilize both of those to their optimum capability. For the commercial industrial base, one of the key things that we have to remember is that we really don't build our own weapons. We may rebuild them when they come back from a fight or as they wear and tear through training. But when it comes time to build the next Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, the next ground combat vehicle, a Kiowa replacement potentially, we're going to be turning to the commercial industrial base to do that. So you want a vibrant commercial industrial base available, A, to ensure that you're getting the innovation that you need in those weapons systems, B, to ensure that you're getting the competition out there so you get a good price as we develop those weapon systems, put them into production, and then sustain them over time. And in looking at that, you also can't just look at the big prime contractors. You really need to understand who is below them, the second, third, fourth tier contractors. So again, as we start drawing down some capability and not spending as much, inside the OSD leadership, we're doing something we call a sector-by-sector, tier-by-tier analysis. So in fact, we just did one on the M1A2. So you start with GDLS, General Dynamics Land Systems, but who supports them? So Allison, L3, and Raytheon, and who supports them? So you got to go down, and that's where you start looking at capabilities that we may want to sustain and look at what it would cost and how we want to manage that. That's one way of doing it, and that's an important way. Another way of sustaining that, and again, I just visited Afghanistan today, is looking at the partnership capability. So you look at the number of different partnerships that Afghanistan has with L3, with BAE, with General Dynamics, where they are actually producing some commercial material there, or they're doing some things for foreign military sales there, plus our own equipment in shared partnership, where in some cases the workforce is intermingled, in other cases it's segregated, but they're using our facility and sometimes our manpower. It's just a great opportunity. We need to look to do more of that, and part of that is really understanding who's important out there in the industrial base, and that is going to take true vigilance on our part. And again, if you want to talk about for the Army Materiel Command is the center of that vigilance.